Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. Welcome back, folks. It is that time of week again where we begin by recapping what was an eventful 4-day weekend of college football and finish by looking ahead to some of the biggest matchups in week 8 to give you an early edge on some of these games. As always, we begin with some midweek action. In week 7, we had a couple of Wednesday night games, and really all I have to say about both of these, unfortunately, is that the Conference USA is a very grim place right now. There is not a lot of high quality football being played in that conference. And if you're betting on these games, tread lightly because you really don't know how to trust any of these offenses at the current moment. Liberty is still the most talented team in this league, I guess, but they're 2-4 and they scored only 19 points in a double-digit road win at UTEP. Missouri State as well continues to be maybe one of the better teams in the league, despite it being their first season in Division I football. Really not much of a deep dive required on these two games, though. Thursday gave us a 4-game slate, with the headliner being an American Conference game between Tulane and East Carolina. While ECU has looked very good against some inferior competition, it's clear that they are unable to scale against the better teams on their schedule to this point. It really comes down to whether they're able to control the line of scrimmage, which they are against teams like Army, but against Tulane here, really got manhandled in the run game, and despite running a lot of plays and pushing the tempo on offense, they really weren't able to do much, only putting up 19 points and never really threatening an outright win here. The two Conference USA matchups on Thursday were definitely more entertaining than Wednesday's games. Kennesaw State blew out Louisiana Tech 35-7. It looked before this like La Tech was possibly the best team in this league, but they dropped a real stinker here, unable to convert on either of their fourth down attempts and generally not doing much on offense throughout this game. Kennesaw definitely benefited from a couple of turnovers, but regardless, looked like the flat out better team in this one. And in the other game, Jacksonville State escaped with a narrow victory at now 0-6 Sam Houston. Really needed to avoid that loss to a winless team. You never want to give them their first one. Jacksonville State has a lot to clean up defensively after this game, but a win is a win, and you just advance to the next week at this point. Another key American Conference matchup was on Friday between USF and North Texas. These two games between this one and ECU Tulane have really given us a clearer picture of who the real contenders are in this league versus some of the pretenders. And unfortunately, despite our preseason bets, it looks as if North Texas may be a pretender. South Florida wins this one 63-36. Despite not throwing an interception to this point of the season, North Texas quarterback Drew Mestemaker threw 3 of them in this game, and they turned it over 5 times as a team. Really hard to win when you do that, but South Florida also able to put up nearly 600 yards of total offense. So while North Texas does have an exciting young defensive coordinator, and they liked some of the pieces that they brought over with him in the offseason, clearly, the defense still has some big strides to make, and USF will remain a top 25 team in the AP probably for the remainder of the season, so they have a lot of advantages right now when it comes to battling for that G5 auto playoff bid. We had a Big Ten After Dark game to close out the Friday night slate between Rutgers and Washington. Once again, Washington started very slowly in this game as they have multiple times throughout the season. Rutgers was up 10-0 at the end of the first quarter, but Washington outscores them 38-9 the rest of the way. Rutgers' defense is Swiss cheese so far this season, and despite their slow starts, Washington is now 5-1 and absolutely should be in the top 25. Their only loss is to the number 1 team in the country, so it makes no sense to me why they're not in the AP rankings. But they are going to have to fix this issue with the slow starts beginning this week when they hit the road to take on Michigan and Ann Arbor. Moving on to the main slate on Saturday, where the SEC games really dominated the conversation. Starting the day in Columbia, Missouri, where the Tigers did put up a decent fight, but ultimately lost by 3 points to the visiting Alabama Crimson Tide. Right now, Ty Simpson is clearly the best quarterback in the nation, and Alabama just might be the best team. They've played the toughest strength of schedule to this point, and their only loss remains their opener against Florida State, where they got blitzed by an environment that they were not prepared for. Clearly, a switch has flipped for this team, and they are as dangerous as any team in the country right now. Missouri will always be able to lean on their run game and their defense, but it appears that they may have more trouble with the pass game, especially in key situations, than some of the other SEC contenders, which may ultimately let them down in spots like this moving forward. Bo Prabula throws his second interception in the game on the final play for Missouri's offense after their defense did an admirable job to get the ball back down just 3 with about a minute to go. Missouri remains in the SEC hunt, of course, with only one loss, but they still haven't hit the road yet this season, which they will do this upcoming week at Auburn. Staying in the SEC and moving over to the Red River Shootout, the Texas defense stood up strong and held Oklahoma to just 6 points. This was one of my favorite plays of the day. The Longhorns come through for me and everyone else on the college football panel space. A lot of questions about Oklahoma's offense moving forward, especially with the health of John Mateer. He threw 3 interceptions in this game and just did not look right from the beginning. It feels as if he was rushed back a bit from his hand injury and probably should have sat out this game, but obviously really wanted to play and be that difference maker for his team. The biggest problem for Oklahoma, though, remains their run game. They run for just 48 yards on 30 carries, which is 1.6 yards per carry in this one. Texas didn't exactly light the world on fire offensively either, but Arch Manning continues to progress week after week. So despite how much the narrative has shifted against him, I actually believe that Manning may be slightly underrated now at this point. Texas remains a top 10 team in my power rating and will remain a part of the SEC title conversation with just one conference loss. The early slate featured a couple of massive upsets. The first one, I guess we probably should have seen coming, but UCLA goes into East Lansing and obliterates Michigan State 38-13, their second consecutive win after starting 0-4 and not having a lead in any of those 4 games. A remarkable turnaround for this team, and I really don't think it's a fluke. Nico Iamaleava was a former 5-star recruit, and while he hasn't always played like that in his career, the talent is obviously there. They found a run game over the past 2 weeks, partially because of the play calling duties of their new OC that's getting so much attention. But 43 carries for 238 yards on the ground for 5.5 yards per carry. An impressive duo between Javian Thomas and Jalen Berger, kind of a lightning and thunder combination there. I truly believe the coaching was the biggest issue with this UCLA team, and I have upgraded them significantly after these 2 games. I happen to know quite a few Michigan State fans personally, and every single one of them is ready for Jonathan Smith to move on, the head coach there. They may be a 3-3 team right now, but it's not a very impressive 3-3. The double overtime win over Boston College looks less impressive each week. And while Aiden Childs was benched midway through this game after going 8 of 17 for 66 yards, the backup, who looked so impressive against Nebraska for a couple of drives, failed to impress in this one, completing just 8 of his 18 passes as well. So Michigan State, I'm not really sure where they go from here. It appears that Smith is probably a dead man walking, but he's got a massive buyout that I'm not sure they're ready to pay yet. So I expect him to stick around for the rest of the season, but after some of the other moves that we've seen recently, nothing would surprise me anymore. Michigan State is a 26.5-point underdog at Indiana this week, by the way. The other biggest upset in the noon window was Pittsburgh going on the road to Florida State and beating the Noles outright 34-31. This is now the third straight loss for Florida State after beating Alabama in week 1 and showing a ton of offensive promise in their next 2 games. They are now 0-3 in the ACC and clearly out of contention for the conference title. Mike Norvell's seat is hot, and I'm not really sure where they go from here. They may need to make a quarterback switch, even though a lot of their offense is based on Castellanos' running ability. They just have not been able to throw the ball downfield effectively enough, and the defense certainly appears to be a step behind still, too. I do want to give some credit to Pittsburgh's offense. They have clearly found their next quarterback in Mason Heinchel, his second career start here after blasting Boston College 48-7 in his debut. He showed some more of his running ability in this game as well, rushing for 64 yards. And Desmond Reed continues to be one of the most dynamic running backs in the ACC. He had 155 yards receiving in this game, as well as 2 receiving touchdowns. An early G5 result that I just have to mention, Toledo, after leading 21-0 on the road at rival Bowling Green, ended up choking that lead away, scoring 2 points the remainder of the game, and that was a safety on the final play. Bowling Green wins 28-23. A remarkable comeback here, and Jason Candle has now lost 17 games as a favorite in the last 4 seasons. More than 2/3 of them have been as a double-digit favorite. You cannot trust this Toledo team no matter who they're playing against. Big rivalry win here for Bowling Green, but just unbelievable collapse once again by the Rockets. There was an AP top 20 matchup in the Big Ten in the early window as well. Ohio State going into Illinois. The spread really told you everything that you needed to know about this game. As I said on last week's podcast, Ohio State was more than a 2-touchdown favorite here, and they covered that number, winning by 18 points in Champaign. Illinois was able to score 2 touchdowns in this one, which is the first time a team has done that to Ohio State this year. But unfortunately, the game was already out of reach, and Ohio State did still come up with a couple of key 4th down and red zone stops, which is their specialty. Ohio State dominated this game despite only putting up 272 total yards of offense. They really continue to not be impressive on that side of the ball, just 2.9 yards per carry in the run game, just 6.1 yards per attempt for Julian Sayin through the air. But they don't need to do much because the defense is so dominant. They've forced a couple of turnovers in this game. Luke Altmaier throws his first interception of the season, and Ohio State continues to do all of the little things right. We'll see if a team can take advantage of their lackadaisical offense at some point, but until that happens, they're going to continue to win. Skipping back over to the SEC, couple of notable midday results. I'll start with Tennessee squeaking out a home win against Arkansas. I expected an inspired effort here from the Hogs with their interim head coach Bobby Petrino, and that's exactly what we got. This game was very close throughout. Arkansas was able to move the ball up and down consistently, and they scored 31 points. Unfortunately, the defense continues to be a problem, although they were improved compared to the Notre Dame game. Still, giving up 485 total yards is not going to do it, especially when you're trying to pull off a road upset in a place like Neyland Stadium. Still, I think Arkansas could have a couple of upset wins up their sleeve at some point throughout this ridiculous schedule that they have the rest of the way. And I still have a ton of question marks about Tennessee's defense. I think that will ultimately let them down this season. Texas A&M continues to play like a top 5 team. People are not going to believe in this team until they win the big one, but until then, they're just going to continue to rack up wins. 34-17 here over visiting Florida. The Gators on their first drive went straight down the field and scored, and DJ Lagway looked as good as he has throughout his career, getting all of his different receivers involved. This game looked like it was going to be a complete shootout. It was 14-all after the first quarter, but Florida only scored 3 points the rest of the game. The Texas A&M front seven really clamped down The pass rush started to get after Lagway a little bit more, and they held Florida to just 1 for 10 on third down. You guys know how high I've been on Texas A&M consistently. I don't think they're overrated one bit, and I still think Florida has a lot to offer throughout the rest of the season despite being 2 and 4, playing one of the toughest schedules in the nation. Another SEC game that I did not expect to be highlighting at all was Ole Miss against Washington State. Ole Miss rolled in here at home as a 32.5 point favorite and won the game by only 3 points. Washington State really gave them a scare in this one, taking a 14-10 lead early in the third quarter. Definitely felt like Ole Miss just came out a little bit sleepy for this game. They've been at home for quite a while. Their last road game was all the way back on September 6th. They were coming off of a bye and looking ahead to a big road game this weekend against Georgia. So I don't entirely blame them for this performance. Washington State as well seems to have a little bit of juice offensively. They finally settled on a quarterback, Zevi Eckhouse, after trying two different other guys early in the season. He was pretty dynamic in this game and made Ole Miss work for it defensively. Ultimately, they only went 2 for 10 on third down, or they may have actually sprung the outright upset, but for Ole Miss, just got to be more focused going forward. Another stunning upset, this one at 3:30, and maybe I buried the lead a little bit with this one, but Penn State loses their third consecutive game, this time at home as a 3-touchdown favorite against Northwestern, and head coach James Franklin got the boot right after the game. He is done at Penn State. 3 weeks ago, this team was in a top 10 battle against Oregon with the lead in overtime, unable to close out that game, and now 3 weeks later, everything has fallen apart and they are without a head coach. So the search begins, and we'll see who Penn State decides to hire as the next guy. But for now, they also will be without quarterback Drew Aller for the rest of the season. He has suffered a major injury in this game. We'll see what his backup has to offer, but as of right now, Penn State, despite having preseason national title hopes, may be struggling to get to a bowl game this season. They travel to Iowa this week, which is never easy, and then they've got to go to Columbus a couple weeks later. Not a lot to look forward to for Penn State. I guess I shouldn't move on from that game without giving some credit to Northwestern. I think this is a very well coached team, despite still struggling in the talent department at most positions. But a couple of guys that I will highlight are their receiver, Griffin Wild. He's been spectacular this season, almost 500 yards already, had 94 and a touchdown in this game. And their young running back, Caleb Komolafe, who has really stepped up in the face of some injuries. Another consistent performance from him on the ground. Northwestern, while again lacking talent at some positions, should be a feisty team in certain matchups going forward in the Big Ten. Staying in the Big Ten, let's talk about Nebraska. Now 5-1 on the season, and they just continue to find ways to survive and advance. Trailed by 7 points on the road heading into the fourth quarter against Maryland, Dylan Raiola threw 3 interceptions in this game, but once again, they just find a way to win. This is not typical of Nebraska. If you remember from previous seasons, this team loses more one-possession games than anyone, but it seems that in year 3, Matt Rule has clearly started to flip things around for them and really learning to overcome adversity in spots like this. So a big win for Nebraska. Maryland is a dangerous team still, and I was honestly impressed by the way that Malik Washington handled himself against what was the number 1 pass defense in America coming into this game. But Maryland's defense is starting to pay for some of their aggressiveness. Like I said, they came up with 3 more interceptions here, but giving up 34 points is ultimately what let them down. Some big plays, especially in the run game for Nebraska, and they come away with a big win, staying in the Big Ten title race technically with just 1 loss. Notre Dame dominated North Carolina State 36-7, and we really don't need to spend too much time talking about this because the score could have been even bigger, but I just have to say that Notre Dame, despite the 2 losses to Miami and Texas A&M, are absolutely still a national title contender. This is a top 5 team despite the 2 losses on their resume. I fully expect them still to run the table and finish 10-2. Couple of notable Big 12 results in the afternoon. Kansas State defeated TCU 41-28. Something has clicked for this team over the past couple of weeks. They really should have beaten Baylor, and if they had, they'd be on a 3-game win streak right now. I think people would probably be talking about them a little bit differently. I thought that the biggest spark was having starting running back Dylan Edwards back, but he once again sat this game out for an injury, and Kansas State put up 41 even without him. The offensive line is playing better, and Avery Johnson has started to use his tight end some more, with 2 of his 3 touchdown passes going to Garrett Oakley in this one. TCU quarterback Josh Hoover continues to throw it a lot, but he struggles with turnovers at times, throwing 2 key interceptions in this one. TCU's defense continues to regress week after week, and I'm not really sure what to make of them moving forward. Kansas State, though, I think will be an undervalued team for the rest of the season. Another Big 12 team that continues to regress, although it's not entirely their fault, is Iowa State. The injuries just continue to rack up for this team, and clearly it's having a big effect on this roster. Back-to-back losses now after starting 5-0, this time on the road to Colorado. Only able to muster 17 points in this game, 2 for 12 on 3rd down and 0 for 1 on 4th down for Iowa State in this game. Colorado wasn't exactly impressive themselves in this game, and honestly, this was a pretty ugly one to watch. But it's just unfortunate that an already depleted roster from last season with Iowa State dealing with so many injuries, if they can get healthy, they will still be a dangerous team in the future, but for now, it's really hard to trust them. Arguably, the biggest game of the day was Indiana hitting the road to take on Oregon. This was a top 10 matchup with Indiana sitting at number 7, and they will be even higher this week after an outright win here, 30-20. This IU team is clearly better than they were last year, and despite struggling to play up to their competition a year ago, that is no longer an issue for Curt Cignetti's team. It is also fair to speculate just how good Oregon really is now, because their biggest win is at Penn State. They struggled mightily at the line of scrimmage in this game. They've got a lot of transfers playing on both lines of scrimmage that have really played very well to this point, but maybe are a little bit overrated. Indiana stuffed the run in this one for Oregon and forced Dante Moore to throw 2 interceptions. The Ducks clearly have a lack of depth at wide receiver as well, with Evan Stewart still injured. I did downgrade Oregon slightly in this game. I don't want to fault them too much because I do think Indiana's a legit team. Ultimately, I think both of these teams will be slightly overrated in the polls moving forward. Good teams, neither one of them elite in my opinion. Another big game in the Big Ten, or what was supposed to be a big game, was Michigan hitting the road to take on USC in Los Angeles. This game was a complete and total embarrassment for Michigan. USC's offense is very good, and we have to give them their props, but they were down their starting running back in this game, and they still completely dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I thought Michigan would have some vulnerabilities in their secondary as well as their pass game offensively due to the struggles that the pass protection has had, but it was really the run game where USC was able to dominate this game. Obviously, a season ago, they were manhandled at the line of scrimmage by Michigan in a very similar way and clearly wanted to get their lick back in this one, running for 224 yards to just 109 for Michigan. The biggest bright spot for Michigan going forward is true freshman Andrew Marsh with his second straight big game, 138 yards receiving with a touchdown in this game. But once again, Underwood did not have much time to throw in this one, and Justice Haynes got a little banged up. So Michigan's got a tough turnaround now at home this week against Washington. Could be a tricky spot, and I'm not really sure what to make of this team moving forward. A lot of really talented players at most positions on the field, but the coaching staff seems to be a little bit unprepared. Said that after the Oklahoma game, and I'm saying it again here. It may be time to look elsewhere at head coach. The last notable Big Ten game of the day was Iowa, absolutely demolishing Wisconsin in a rivalry matchup 37-0. This was in Madison as well, one of the worst home losses in Wisconsin history, and I believe the first time they've ever been shut out at home, at least in this modern era. Luke Fickell is clearly a dead man walking, another coach that is just not going to last much longer. I've never seen Wisconsin this bad in my entire life, and it's honestly tough to watch. Iowa really didn't have to do much offensively in this game, only putting up 319 total yards, but Wisconsin just handed it to them on a silver platter, turning it over multiple times in the first half and never presenting much of a threat offensively. Iowa continues to play very well along both lines of scrimmage, and that sets their floor pretty high. Their ceiling, though, unfortunately, is capped by their lack of offensive ability, but a dominant win here, and Luke Fickell's seat could not be hotter. Probably the most frustrating game for me personally of the entire slate was at night in Jordan-Hare Stadium, Auburn against Georgia. Auburn had this game seemingly in the bag in the first half. They completely dominated from start to finish, and they should have gone up 17-0 with about a minute remaining before halftime. Very controversial review, one of many, many reviews near the end of this first half. I heard that from the time the 2-minute timeout was announced until halftime was 36 minutes of real time, and just so much wasted by the officials. It is remarkable how much influence the Zebras have had over so many of these primetime SEC matchups this season, especially with games involving Auburn. It truly feels like the league wants Hugh Freeze gone, the Auburn head coach, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get their wish by the end of this season. This is a very talented roster that just struggles a little bit offensively, but they had it going in the first half. They fixed their third down issue because they finally were able to get in third and shorts rather than 3rd and 15 after a holding penalty or a false start every drive. But once again, should have gone up 17-0. Georgia ultimately capitalizes and kicks a field goal to make it 10-3 before half. Hugh Freeze was so rattled going into halftime that it's clear he was unable to get his team to refocus. They never scored again, and Georgia scores a late touchdown instead of running out the clock to go up 20-10 and cover the spread there. So very disappointing result for Auburn. I'm really not sure how they will respond in the upcoming weeks. Hugh Freeze has got a lot of work to do to keep his job. Texas Tech continues to prove that they are a cut above the rest of the Big 12. Doesn't seem to matter which quarterback is in the game, whether it's Baron Morton or Will Hammond. They'll just run the ball and play defense if they're not liking what they're seeing out of their quarterback. Cameron Dickey runs for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. Kansas's defense has a lot of problems, but this Texas Tech team is supremely talented. A lot of people questioned whether their portal strategy would work, and it clearly has. They've taken a bunch of guys from all around the country and made them gel remarkably quickly. Just so much talent on the field, especially defensively this year for Texas Tech. Another game that was heavily tainted by officiating was BYU and Arizona. This was a very competitive game, but one that had a lot of controversial moments in it, similar to Georgia Auburn. It just seems like the later in the day you go in these college football Saturdays, the more questionable the refs become. Not really sure why that is, but it's hard to look at this game objectively because of all of the other factors here. BYU wins in double overtime 33-27 and probably deserved to win ultimately, but just a lot of questionable things happening in this game. Not really sure what the big takeaway for either side is. And the last notable game that I'll touch on in the Big 12 as well is Arizona State against Utah. Arizona State went into this game without their quarterback, Sam Leavitt, and Jeff Sims predictably did struggle quite a bit, just completing 18 of his 38 passes and running for 52 yards, but on 21 carries. The offense was very Sims-centric, and it did not work out for them. The Utes continue to dominate everyone besides Texas Tech, so maybe it is really just that Texas Tech is that dang good. Utah looked impressive on the ground and defensively in this game. Really didn't ask Devon Dampier to do a whole lot. They've got a massive matchup against BYU this week that we'll talk about in just a second. All right, now that we've thoroughly recapped week 7, it's time to look ahead to week 8, where we've got some big time matchups that you should be aware of. I'm going to give you some initial thoughts, mostly on the lines, but also just how I've seen these two teams, maybe some situational spots. So let's get into it. As per usual, most of the biggest games are in the SEC. There's a big one early in Nashville where Vanderbilt, for the first time in their school's history, is a favorite over LSU. And I think for good reason. As good as LSU's defense has been this year, they just cannot seem to get the offense in rhythm. They ran the ball a little bit better against South Carolina than they have the rest of the year, but they also just are not in sync between Nussmeier and his receivers. And Vanderbilt can truly score against anyone, so I'm expecting a bounce back effort for them after only scoring 14 points at Alabama. I like the Commodores in this one. Another big SEC matchup, and this one is between two top 10 teams. It's Ole Miss traveling to Georgia, where they are a 7.5 point underdog despite being 6-0 on the season. Georgia has the one loss in their building to Alabama. Georgia is not used to losing games at home, and I fully expect them to bounce back in this one, but I have seen a lot of vulnerabilities in this team in recent weeks. That includes the game against Auburn, where I really wasn't impressed with the defense. The pass rush has not been there all season. The run game has been mostly good, but the downfield passing attack has been very inconsistent outside of the Tennessee game. We'll see if Ole Miss can limit the run because that is their biggest weakness defensively. I'm expecting a bit of a slugfest in this one, but Ole Miss certainly can turn up the tempo if they get their offense going. The third and final big ranked matchup in the SEC is going to be Tennessee and Alabama, the third Saturday of October, as this rivalry is known. Alabama is about an 8.5 point favorite in this game. As I said earlier, I have a lot of concerns with Tennessee's defense, and there's nobody playing the quarterback position better right now than Ty Simpson. His receivers are excellent, and I think they should find a ton of success throughout this game. We'll see if Tennessee can match them score for score. If they can, this could be one of the most entertaining games all year. If they can't, it should be a relatively straightforward win for Alabama. A couple of interesting lines from a betting perspective in the early window. Duke opened as a 3 point favorite and are down to 1.5 now, but still remain a favorite against number 12 Georgia Tech. This game is being played at Duke. And I know you guys know how high I've been on this Blue Devil team since the preseason. They blew an opportunity to beat Illinois with a ton of turnovers and mistakes. They followed that up with another tough loss on the road at Tulane. But this is still a very talented team, and they have found a run game to pair with Darian Mensah. Georgia Tech is still very reliant on their quarterback Haynes King, so as fun as they are offensively at times, I don't know that they'll have enough balance to win this one on the road. Certainly leaning towards the Blue Devils, although it's hard to trust them with how many mistakes they've made this season. Another one that's standing out to me is the fact that Michigan is just a 5.5 point favorite against Washington. I think the books saw some of the vulnerabilities that I saw with Michigan, especially with their coaching staff. This is a very tricky spot for them, despite Washington crossing multiple time zones to get to this game. I am very worried as a Michigan fan for this matchup. Couple of big games in the Big 12 with very close lines. Houston, just a 1.5 point home favorite against Arizona. Their quarterback, Connor Wigman, has been banged up the past couple of games, so you definitely want to keep an eye out on his status before this game. Clearly, the line tells you this will be very competitive. I don't have a strong lean at the moment, but I do have a strong lean to the road team in the other Big 12 game here, which is Baylor heading into Fort Worth to take on TCU. I'm pretty much out on this TCU team, although both of these offenses can absolutely score. The total's at 66 and a half. Very high number, and for good reason. Hard to trust either one of these two defenses. I think it will probably come down to who can get a stop on fourth down, because both teams are very aggressive, and who can force more turnovers. One more early line that caught my eye was in the SEC, actually. South Carolina, just a 5.5 point home underdog against Oklahoma. Possible hangover spot for OU after that tough loss to Texas. Emotional loss. Are they really going to be able to get up for this game? South Carolina needs one at home desperately. I think OU is clearly the better team, but once again, a very tricky spot for them turning around after Texas. An afternoon line that caught my eye in the Big Ten was Northwestern being just a 3.5 point home favorite against Purdue. They're essentially telling you that these teams are nearly identical if you put them on a neutral field, and that's with Northwestern coming off their biggest win in a decade, going on the road to beat Penn State. I think this serves as a perfect letdown spot against a feisty Boiler team that I've been backing week after week. They came through with a clutch cover at 7.5 against Minnesota this past weekend, and I think they might win this game outright at Northwestern. Arguably the biggest game in the group of five this week is in the Sun Belt between Old Dominion and James Madison. Old Dominion is coming off of a beatdown loss at Marshall, 48-24. They had a bunch of turnovers in that game. Their defense struggled a little bit, and I did expect them to struggle in this game overall looking ahead to this matchup at James Madison. I'm not overly concerned, honestly, because Marshall's offense has quietly been playing great. I think Old Dominion just caught them at the worst time and in a tough spot for them personally. I think they bounce back here against the James Madison offense that has really been struggling the past couple of weeks, put up just 14 points against Georgia State and then 24 against Louisiana. Really struggled in the red zone. I trust ODU much more, even on the road here, and the line is telling you that they're the better team, being just a 1.5 point road underdog. Texas Tech gets another chance to show that they are the top dogs in the Big 12. This is arguably their biggest test remaining this season on the road at Arizona State. Really, ASU needs Sam Leavitt to play in this game to have a chance to be competitive. But the fact that Texas Tech is a 9.5 point favorite on the road here tells you everything you need to know about them, and I don't think they'll be facing much resistance after this week. So ASU, you better have your healthy quarterback ready to go for this game, or Texas Tech is going to run the table and finish 12-0. Texas is in a bit of a tricky turnaround spot as well, coming off of the Oklahoma game. I think it works against both teams, actually, coming into this week. They've got to hit the road to take on Kentucky, a team that clearly is overmatched talent-wise, but they have a feisty enough defense where they could make this game interesting if they force some turnovers, just like they did to Ole Miss. Only lost that game by 7 points. So even though Texas is a 12.5 point favorite, which is a very weird number, I'm leaning pretty strong towards the home dog here. Double-digit underdogs in the SEC have been printing in recent years, so keep an eye out for any of those that you see. Penn State hits the road to take on Iowa this week, and they are actually a 3 point underdog. As I said earlier, they will be without Drew Aller, and we really don't know what to expect from their backup, so I'm staying far away from this game. But if you look at it purely from a line value perspective, you're getting an incredible number with Penn State if you do want to buy in. As I said earlier, Notre Dame truly is a national title contender, and they are a 9.5 point favorite at home against USC, who just looked incredibly impressive against Michigan. You could say maybe that's too many points, but right now I have no interest in stepping in front of Notre Dame and fading them. Slight lean to the home team here, actually, even at this big number. but maybe we'll get a more competitive game than I'm expecting. One more top 25 matchup to touch on, and we will get out of here this week. Utah and BYU in the Holy War. We're not supposed to call it that anymore, but we are going to on this podcast. Utah only number 23 in the polls. BYU is number 15, and yet Utah is a 3.5 point road favorite. Once again, these are the types of things that you have to look at when you're breaking down a game, combining the ball knowledge with the line knowledge. Utah has looked extremely impressive and, in my opinion, has a significant talent advantage in this game. I will be all over the Utes as one of my favorite plays of Week 8. All right, that was a taste of the Week 8 preview. If you want a more detailed breakdown of every key matchup, then join us on Twitter for our live spaces at 10 a.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. We have a lot of fun doing those every week and hope to see you in there. Appreciate everybody for tuning in to the podcast today. Hopefully everybody enjoyed and learned something, but until next time, hopefully everyone has a great rest of your day.